My daughter-in-law called me family embarrassment at her wedding, until her father recognized me. The crystal champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the polished marble floor as my new daughter-in-law's words echoed through the prestigious Hartwell family estate. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with," Ashley had announced to her wealthy parents with that practiced smile of hers, her manicured hand barely grazing my shoulder. The entire wedding reception seemed to pause, 200 guests turning to stare at the 55-year-old woman in the understated navy dress. That's when William Hartwell's face went white as his tuxedo shirt. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me backtrack to how we got here, because honey, this story is about to get very interesting. My name is Rebecca Thompson, but most people call me Becca. I've spent the last 15 years perfecting the art of being strategically invisible, which turns out to be excellent training for what comes next. My son Christopher had been dating Ashley for 8 months, and I'd met her exactly twice before today, 2 brief dinners where she'd asked pointed questions about my modest lifestyle and whether I might need assistance with expenses as you get older. The wedding itself was spectacular, I'll give them that. The Hartwell estate sprawled across 60 acres of perfectly manicured Napa Valley countryside, complete with a chapel that could seat 300 and gardens that must have cost a fortune. Ashley floated down the aisle in a Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than most people make in 6 months. And Christopher looked happier than I'd seen him since his father died. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress from Nordstrom paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. I'd learned long ago that the key to maintaining certain privacy was to look exactly like what people expected to see, a widow living comfortably but modestly on her late husband's Boeing engineering pension and life insurance. The ceremony was beautiful, even if I did notice Ashley's mother, Catherine, sizing me up like I was something that didn't quite belong. The reception was where things got interesting. The Hartwell family had spared no expense: ice sculptures, a 12-piece orchestra, and enough orchids to stock a greenhouse. I'd found a corner table, watching my 32-year-old son dance with his new wife, when Ashley approached with her parents in tow. "Mom and Dad," she'd said with that sugar-sweet tone that made my teeth ache, "I want you to meet Christopher's mother." Then came the words that changed everything: "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with." William Hartwell's champagne flute had frozen halfway to his lips, his eyes locked on my face with an expression of dawning recognition that made my stomach flip. "Rebecca Thompson," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the string quartet. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. "Wait," William continued, his voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. "Aren't you the woman from the Hartwell Industries acquisition meeting 3 years ago? Aren't you that mysterious investor who bought my company?" William Hartwell's words cut through the reception noise like a knife through silk. The color drained from Ashley's face as she looked between her father and me, confusion replacing her earlier smugness. Catherine Hartwell's diamond tennis bracelet caught the chandelier light as her hand flew to her throat, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her socialite brain. The truth is, most people don't know what real wealth looks like. They expect Hermes bags and Louboutin shoes, Tesla Model S cars and obvious displays. What they don't expect is a woman in a simple but elegant dress who shops at Macy's and drives a reliable Honda Accord. That's exactly what I've been counting on for the past 15 years. It started with my late husband Tom's invention, a small piece of technology that revolutionized smartphone battery efficiency. We were both engineers, Tom and I, working for Apple in Cupertino back in the early 2000s. When Tom developed his power management system in 2010, we thought maybe we'd make enough to retire comfortably. We had no idea we were sitting on a gold mine. The patent sold for $25 million in 2012. $25 million. Christopher was 24 then, fresh out of Stanford with his marketing degree and full of dreams about building his own career. Tom and I made a decision that day that would shape the next 13 years of our lives. We told Christopher we'd gotten a substantial settlement, enough to be very comfortable, but nothing extravagant. He never questioned it, probably assumed it was a few million at most. What Christopher didn't know was that $25 million was just the beginning. Tom and I took that money and started investing systematically. Conservative Microsoft and Apple stocks at first, then Amazon and Google as we learned the market, real estate in emerging neighborhoods, tech startups with solid fundamentals. Tom had a gift for spotting undervalued opportunities before Wall Street caught on. By the time he died 5 years ago in 2020, our portfolio was worth over $900 million. $900 million. the same amount I'd later used to acquire Hartwell Industries 2 years after Tom's death. The irony was delicious. While Ashley had been giving me concerned looks and asking if I needed help managing my finances as I got older, I'd been the anonymous investor who'd rescued her father's failing company. The same company William had nearly destroyed through overexpansion into the electric vehicle market and poor debt management, forcing him to accept a buyout from what he thought was Goldman Sachs' corporate investment arm. That investment firm was a shell company controlled by me. I'd bought Hartwell Industries not out of malice, but because it was fundamentally sound beneath William's mismanagement. The company had good bones, solid customer relationships in renewable energy and talented employees. Under proper financial oversight, it was thriving again. The man whose daughter had just called me a family embarrassment had been living off my business decisions for the past 3 years. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, looking directly at William. "I think you have me confused with someone else." But we both knew he didn't. I could see the recognition in his eyes, the memory of that Goldman Sachs boardroom where I'd sat quietly while my attorneys handled the negotiations. He'd barely acknowledged me then, assuming I was just someone's wife along for the formalities. Now, as Ashley stared at us both with growing alarm, I realized my carefully maintained discretion was about to become very complicated. The next morning, I sat in my comfortable Palo Alto apartment, sipping coffee from my favorite Stanford alumni mug, watching Christopher pace across my living room like a caged tiger. He'd called at 7 a.m., demanding answers to questions I wasn't ready to address. Sleep had been impossible after the reception, my mind replaying William Hartwell's recognition and the panic I'd seen flash across Ashley's eyes. "Mom, you have to help me understand what happened last night," Christopher said, running his hands through his hair the same way he had as a frustrated child. "William pulled me aside after you left and asked some very pointed questions about Dad's patents and your investment activities." I'd slipped out quietly after William's revelation, claiming exhaustion. The truth was, I needed time to think. 15 years of carefully maintained privacy had cracked in a single moment, and I wasn't sure how to handle the exposure. Christopher had inherited his father's intensity, but channeled it differently. Where Tom had been methodical and strategic, Christopher was direct and emotional. "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. He wanted to know about Dad's technology patents, about whether you'd been involved in any major business transactions, about our family's actual financial situation. Christopher stopped pacing and fixed me with those serious brown eyes he'd inherited from Tom. "Mom, he seemed to think you were some kind of major investor." It was bizarre. The coffee tasted bitter suddenly. This was the conversation I'd been both expecting and dreading. Christopher had built his career as a senior marketing manager at Salesforce through genuine talent and hard work. He'd earned his position through 60-hour weeks, bought his San Francisco condo through careful saving, and lived within his means because he believed those were the values Tom and I had taught him. How could I explain that while he'd been working those long hours to earn his promotions, I could have bought his entire division without straining my budget? While he'd been saving diligently for his down payment, I'd been managing a portfolio worth more than most Fortune 500 companies. "Christopher, sit down," I said gently. "We need to talk." But before I could continue, my phone buzzed with a text message from Ashley. "Rebecca, I think we should have lunch today. There are some things Christopher and I would like to discuss with you." I showed Christopher the message, watching his expression shift from confusion to concern. "What do you think she wants to discuss?" I had a pretty good idea. Ashley Hartwell wasn't the type to let mysteries remain unsolved, especially when they potentially involved money. She'd probably spent the entire night questioning her father about his suspicions, and now she was ready to investigate further. The question was, how much had William actually figured out from that brief boardroom encounter 3 years ago? "I think," I said carefully, "your wife is more observant than we've given her credit for." Christopher's phone rang, Ashley's name appearing on the screen. He answered immediately, and I could hear her voice even from across the room, bright and artificially cheerful. "Christopher, honey, I was hoping we could all have lunch together today. There are some family things I'd love to discuss with your mother now that we're officially relatives." When he hung up, Christopher looked at me with the same expression he'd worn as a teenager when he suspected I knew more about his broken curfew than I was letting on. "Mom, is there something you need to tell me about our family's finances?" Outside my apartment window, I watched the familiar rhythm of morning commuters heading to their jobs at Google and Facebook. People with straightforward concerns about quarterly reports and product launches. I envied them their simplicity, their ordinary worries that seemed luxurious compared to mine. Everything, I said finally. I need to tell you everything. Ashley arrived at the French Laundry 45 minutes early, already seated at a corner table when Christopher and I walked in. She'd chosen the most exclusive restaurant in Napa Valley, I noticed, and had taken the seat that gave her the best view of the entire room. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and she was wearing a Chanel suit I recognized from a recent Vogue spread. "Rebecca, Christopher, thank you so much for meeting me," she said, standing to embrace us both. Her smile was radiant, but I caught the calculating look in her green eyes as she assessed my simple black Target dress and modest jewelry. I ordered us a nice bottle of wine to celebrate being family. The wine was a Screaming Eagle Cabernet that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Clearly, Ashley was making a statement about her expectations for this conversation. "This is lovely, dear," I said, settling into my chair, though perhaps a bit extravagant for a casual family lunch. "Oh, I don't think anything about our family is casual anymore," she replied, her smile never wavering. "I spent some time last night talking with Daddy about his business experiences, and he shared some fascinating stories about corporate acquisitions and anonymous investors." Christopher looked between us, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "Ashley, what does this have to do with lunch?" She ignored him, focusing entirely on me. "You know, Rebecca, I majored in business at Wharton. I find corporate finance absolutely fascinating, especially complex investment structures and shell companies. Daddy mentioned that when Hartwell Industries was acquired, the buyer was remarkably discreet." I sipped my wine and waited. Let her make the first real move. "The interesting thing about discreet investors," she continued, "is that they often have very good reasons for maintaining their privacy, usually involving substantial wealth that they prefer to keep out of public attention." "That sounds reasonable," I said calmly. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a delicious secret. "Daddy said the woman in the acquisition meeting was quiet, elegant, and seemed to defer to her attorneys, but he remembered thinking at the time that she had the bearing of someone accustomed to making significant decisions." Christopher was staring at me now, pieces beginning to fall into place in his mind. "Mom." Before I could respond, Ashley pulled out her phone and showed us a photograph. It was a news article from 3 years ago about the Hartwell Industries acquisition, including a small photo from the signing ceremony. There, partially obscured by lawyers and corporate executives, was a woman in a navy blue dress whose face was barely visible. "The photo quality isn't great," Ashley said conversationally, "but the woman's posture, her height, even the way she holds her purse, it's remarkably similar to yours, Rebecca." The silence stretched between us as Christopher studied the photo, recognition dawning in his expression. I had to admire Ashley's thoroughness, even as I felt my carefully constructed privacy beginning to unravel. "That's quite a coincidence," I said finally. "Isn't it?" Ashley's smile had a sharp edge now. "Of course, coincidences happen all the time, like how my family's financial difficulties began right around the time someone paid $900 million for Daddy's company, or how that same mysterious investor seemed to vanish completely after the acquisition, almost like they preferred to remain anonymous." Christopher set down his wine glass with shaking hands. "Mom, please tell me you're not who she thinks you are." I looked at my son, at the young man I'd raised to value honesty and integrity above all else, and realized that 15 years of well-intentioned deception had finally caught up with me. "Christopher, there are some things about your father's patents and our investments that I never explained to you." Ashley's triumph was evident in every line of her perfectly composed face. But as I watched her savor what she clearly thought was her moment of victory, I found myself wondering if she had any idea what she'd just unleashed. 3 days later, I sat in my financial advisor's downtown San Francisco office, watching James Patterson review the documents I'd requested. The lunch with Christopher and Ashley had ended with my son storming out after I'd confirmed his worst suspicions, and his new wife making veiled suggestions about family financial planning and shared responsibilities. Now I needed to understand exactly what position I was in. "Rebecca, I have to say this is an unusual request," James said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he studied the Hartwell family financial profile spread across his mahogany desk. "Why the sudden interest in your daughter-in-law's family background?" I'd called James the morning after our disastrous lunch, asking for a comprehensive analysis of the Hartwell family's current financial situation. What I'd learned was more complex than I'd expected. I hadn't realized when I bought Hartwell Industries that I was acquiring my future daughter-in-law's inheritance. James's eyebrows shot up. Your daughter-in-law? The one who just married Christopher? When I nodded, he let out a low whistle. That's complicated. Tell me something I don't know. He pulled up several files on his computer, cross-referencing data I'd requested. All right, let's walk through this chronologically. In 2021, Hartwell Industries was struggling with debt service on expansion loans they'd taken in 2019. William Hartwell had overextended the company buying smaller renewable energy firms, and when interest rates rose, they couldn't service the debt load. I remembered that acquisition well. It had been one of my more strategic investments, buying a fundamentally sound company at a discount because of temporary financial stress. What was the family's expectation at that time? According to the financial records we've obtained, Ashley Hartwell had been positioning herself as the eventual successor to her father. She'd worked their summers during Stanford, completed her Wharton MBA with a focus on family business management, and had been telling people she'd be taking over the company after transition period. The pieces were fitting together in an uncomfortable way. So when I acquired the company and brought in professional management, I eliminated her expected career path. More than that, you eliminated what she saw as her birthright. James pulled up another document. Here's where it gets interesting. I've been monitoring some discreet inquiries about your investment activities. Someone has been asking questions about shell companies, acquisition structures, and anonymous investors. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? Professional-level questions, not casual curiosity, but the kind of research that suggests someone with business training and possibly legal connections. He turned his monitor toward me. Rebecca, I think your daughter-in-law has hired a private investigator. The implications hit me immediately. 15 years of careful legal structures and deliberate discretion could be unraveled by someone with sufficient motivation and resources. How vulnerable are we? That depends on how deep they're willing to dig and what they plan to do with the information. James's expression was serious. Your privacy protections are solid, but they're not impenetrable. A determined investigation with legal backing could eventually trace the ownership structures back to you. I thought about Ashley's behavior at lunch, the way she'd presented her discoveries like a chess player revealing a winning strategy. What would you recommend? Honestly, get ahead of this. If she's building a case for some kind of financial claim or family obligation, it's better to control the narrative than to be exposed by it. He leaned back in his chair, considering. But Rebecca, there's something else you need to think about. If this becomes public, it won't just affect you. Christopher's career could be impacted if it looks like his success was connected to family wealth he wasn't even aware of. I hadn't fully considered that angle. Christopher's reputation at Salesforce was built on merit. If it came out that his mother was a major investor, people might question every promotion he'd earned, every client relationship he'd built. The irony was bitter. I'd hidden my wealth to protect him, and now that secret might damage everything he'd worked to achieve. There's one more thing, James continued, pulling up a final document. The Hartwell family's current financial situation is more precarious than it appears. They've been maintaining their lifestyle through credit and home equity loans, probably expecting William to find another business opportunity or for Ashley to marry into wealth. And now she thinks she has. Exactly. But Rebecca, if they're planning some kind of approach for financial assistance or inclusion in your investments, you need to be prepared for what that might look like. This isn't going to be a simple family conversation anymore. As I left James's office, I realized I was facing the same decision Tom and I had made 15 years ago, except now the stakes were much higher. This time, I wouldn't just be protecting my son's independence. I'd be fighting to prevent everything I'd built from being turned against my family. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a bottle of the Opus One that Tom and I had been saving for special occasions, poured myself a generous glass, and spread 15 years of financial records across my dining table. If Ashley wanted to play investigator, she was about to discover she'd chosen the wrong person to underestimate. The meeting took place in James Patterson's conference room the following Monday. Present were myself, Christopher, Ashley, her attorney Nathan Brooks, and her parents, William and Catherine Hartwell. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. Let's be clear about why we're here, Nathan Brooks began, adjusting his expensive Armani suit as he spread documents across the mahogany table. My client has discovered that Mrs. Thompson has been concealing substantial assets while allowing her son's wife's family to experience financial hardship. This suggests either a deliberate pattern of deception or potential financial impropriety that warrants investigation. James Patterson, sitting beside me, responded calmly. Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Thompson's financial activities are completely legal and properly reported. Your client's recent regulatory complaints appear to be motivated by personal grievances rather than legitimate concerns. Ashley leaned forward, her voice carefully controlled. This isn't about personal grievances. This is about family responsibility and transparency. Rebecca has been manipulating people's lives while pretending to be something she's not. I finally spoke. Ashley, I've never manipulated anyone. I invested in underperforming companies and improved them. I maintained my privacy because I preferred discretion to publicity. Neither of those things is illegal or immoral. You bought my father's company and let him think he'd failed as a businessman, she shot back. Your father did fail as a businessman, I replied evenly. I saved his company and protected his employees' jobs. Under his management, Hartwell Industries would have been bankrupt within months. William Hartwell, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate what you did for the company, but you can't deny that you've been strategic about concealing your involvement in our family's affairs. Strategic, yes. Deceptive, no. You never asked about my investment activities, and I had no obligation to volunteer the information. Nathan Brooks pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Thompson, we have evidence that you've used your financial position to manipulate multiple situations involving my client's family, the consulting fees paid to Mr. Hartwell, the timing of various business decisions affecting their financial stability, even the investigation into my client's personal activities. Evidence of what exactly? James asked. Of a pattern of control and manipulation designed to maintain power over this family's financial future. I looked around the table at these people who thought they understood the game they were playing. Mr. Brooks, let me make something very clear. I don't control your client's family. I don't owe them money. I don't owe them explanations. And I certainly don't owe them access to my assets. But you do owe your son honesty, Ashley interjected. And you owe your daughter-in-law basic respect. Respect. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You introduced me as a family embarrassment at your wedding reception. You hired investigators to research my private affairs. You filed regulatory complaints to try to force me into a financial settlement. And now you want to lecture me about respect. The silence that followed was deafening. Christopher, who'd been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. What do you want, Ashley? What would it take to end this? She exchanged glances with her attorney, then looked directly at me. I want a formal family financial agreement, something that establishes clear expectations and responsibilities for all parties. What kind of responsibilities? I asked. Nathan Brooks pulled out another document. We're proposing a family trust structure with shared governance and defined distribution policies. Mrs. Thompson would contribute a substantial portion of her assets to the trust, which would be managed by a family board for the benefit of all members. I almost laughed at the audacity. You want me to put my money into a trust controlled by a committee that includes people who've been investigating me and filing complaints against me? We want a fair arrangement that protects everyone's interests, Ashley said. I stood up and walked to the conference room window, looking down at the San Francisco Bay where container ships carried goods from around the world, operated by people who understood that business required trust and respect. I have a counter-proposal, I said finally. I turned back to face the room. Ashley, you have 72 hours to withdraw all regulatory complaints and cease all investigation activities. In return, I'll provide a settlement that allows you and your parents to maintain your current lifestyle without further interference from me. What kind of settlement? Nathan Brooks asked suspiciously. $6 million. One-time payment. In exchange, you sign agreements never to contact my son or me again. The room went completely silent. Christopher stared at me in shock. Mom, you can't be serious. But I was completely serious. I just offered to pay $6 million to remove toxic people from our lives permanently. And judging by the expressions around the table, everyone was beginning to understand exactly how serious I was about protecting what mattered to me. 6 million, Ashley repeated slowly, as if testing how the words sounded. To never contact Christopher again? That's correct. Nathan Brooks was already calculating. I could see it in his eyes. 6 million was more than his client could hope to win in any legal proceeding, and it came without years of litigation risk. Mrs. Thompson, that's a generous offer, but it seems designed to break up a marriage rather than resolve a family dispute. Mr. Brooks, the marriage was already broken. I'm simply offering to pay for a clean ending rather than a messy one. Christopher stood up abruptly. Mom, stop. Both of you just stop. He looked around the room with an expression of complete disgust. This is insane. We're sitting here negotiating the price of my marriage like it's a business transaction. Isn't that exactly what it's been? I asked gently. He turned to Ashley, his voice carrying a pain that made my heart ache. Ashley, I need you to answer something honestly. Did you marry me because you loved me, or because you thought I came from money? The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Christopher, that's not a fair question, she said finally. It's the only question that matters. I watched my son's face as he waited for an answer that never came. In that silence, 15 years of careful parenting choices, financial discretion, and protective secrecy crystallized into a single moment of clarity. $6 million, I repeated, looking directly at Ashley. Plus I'll arrange for your parents to keep their Marin County home and your father to retain his consulting position at Hartwell Industries. You sign the papers and walk away from my family. And if I refuse? I smiled, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, it was completely genuine. Then you get nothing. Your parents lose their house, your father loses his income, and you spend the next several years in legal proceedings that will cost you far more than you could ever hope to win. Nathan Brooks was whispering urgently in Ashley's ear, probably explaining the mathematical reality of the situation. $6 million in hand versus years of expensive litigation with an uncertain outcome. I need time to consider this, Ashley said. You have until noon tomorrow. After that, the offer expires and you deal with the consequences of the complaints you filed. As the meeting broke up, Christopher lingered behind while the others filed out. Mom, did you really just buy my freedom from my wife? No, sweetheart. I just gave you the information you needed to make your own choice. He was quiet for a long moment. What if she takes the money? Then you'll know exactly who she was, and you can move forward with your life. And if she doesn't? Then you'll still know who she was, and I'll make sure she regrets trying to manipulate our family. Christopher looked at me with something that might have been admiration mixed with fear. When did you become so ruthless? I thought about the question seriously. I think I always was, Christopher. I just never had a reason to show it before. The next morning at 11:47 a.m., Nathan Brooks called James Patterson to accept the settlement offer. By 5 p.m., the papers were signed and the money transferred. Ashley took the $6 million and disappeared from our lives as completely as if she'd never existed. Christopher filed for divorce the following week, citing irreconcilable differences. 6 months later, he called me on a Sunday evening. Mom, I met someone. Her name is Sarah. She's a teacher, and she has no idea you're wealthy. How do you know? Because when I told her my mother lived in a nice apartment and drove a reliable car, she said that sounded like the kind of woman who had her priorities straight. I smiled, feeling something relax in my chest that had been tense for years. She sounds perfect. When do I get to meet her? Next Sunday. But Mom, when we have dinner, can you just be the woman who raised me to work hard and treat people with respect? Can you leave the corporate mogul at home? I laughed, realizing that after 15 years of hiding who I was, I'd finally learned the difference between being invisible and being private. Of course, sweetheart. But if she turns out to be investigating our family finances, all bets are off. Deal, he said, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. For the first time in months, the future looked exactly as bright as I'd always planned it would be. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.